come down to the floor as quickly as possible, that would be very much appreciated. Members, if you could come down on the floor as soon as possible, that would be appreciated. Thank you. Members and guests, a quorum is present. We ask our guests and visitors in the rear of the chamber and in the gallery to please stand for the prayer. We ask our guest chaplain, Rabbi Denise Egger of Congregation Kol Ami in Los Angeles, to offer the day's prayer. Rabbi Egger.
Let us pray together. Holy One of blessing, we call you by many names. On this spring morning, we ask your abundant blessings upon our great state of California and all of its inhabitants. Our golden state is filled with your glory, Holy One, from stirring mountain vistas to our ocean panoramas and velvet desert landscapes. As the book of Psalms teaches us, the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. Bless our land in these difficult economic times, when our California residents struggle to maintain our way of life, to care for their children and families, to find access to jobs and meaningful work. Bless these legislators who work hours on end to find solutions to our state's woes. Help them work together in the spirit of cooperation across the partisan aisle, and help them to see that their actions or inactions create success or suffering in our state. Help them to serve with compassion and fairness. As this House of the Assembly attends to the work of government, let each of our elected leaders govern with distinction and merit, and let each member bring her or his wisdom to the heart of the work of California and its citizenry. Let them know they are making a positive difference in the lives of millions each day. So too bless their families, their children and grandchildren, partners and spouses with special patience and love that it takes to support them in this work. As the prophet Malachi teaches, turn the heart of the parents toward their children and turn the hearts of the children toward their parents. Dear Holy One, on this day, be near to each person here, our legislators and their families, the many who work in this Capitol, and fill them up with strength and clear thinking, good health, and your abundant blessing. Let them attune their spirits and souls on this day with right intentions and right actions to fill your world with an ancient gift of peace, of shalom. Amen.
We ask our guests and visitors to continue standing and join Assemblywoman Yamada for the flag salute. Assemblywoman Yamada. You may be seated. Reading of the previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Thursday, April 15, 2010. The Assembly met at 9:30 a.m. Honorable Fiona Miles, Speaker Pro Tem of the Assembly, providing...
Ms. Saldana moves and Mr. Hagman seconds that the reading of the previous day's journal will be dispensed with. Presentations of petitions, there are none. Introduction and reference of bills will be deferred. Reports of committees will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Messages from the Governor, there are none. Messages from the Senate, there are none. Motions and resolutions. The absences for the day will be deemed read and printed in the journal. On behalf of Mr. Calderon, I will be presenting some motions. I would request unanimous consent for Assembly members Ruskin and Block to have guests and photographers on the floor, at the dais, and in the gallery for the special ceremony in remembrance of the Holocaust. Without objection. Request unanimous consent to waive the filed notice to allow the Human Services Committee to hear and report AB 2418 Cook on Tuesday, April 27th in room 437 at 1:30 p.m., pending referral from the Judiciary Committee. Without objection. Allow the Natural Resources Committee to hear AB 2514 Skinner and AB 2724 Blumenfield on Wednesday, April 21st in the Rules Committee room at 9:30 a.m. pending referral from the Utilities and Commerce Committee. Without objection. Allow the Judiciary Committee to hear AB 1639 Nava Bassin Liu on Thursday, April 22nd upon adjournment of session in room 126. Without objection, and allow the Health Committee to hear AB 2541 Portantino and Fletcher and AB 2661 Salis on Tuesday, April 20th, 2010, in room 4202 at 1:30 p.m. Without objection. At the request of the author, we would like to remove from the inactive file item A17, SP 364 by Flores, for purposes of amendment at the request of the author. Without objection. Would like to request unanimous consent to remove from the first day consent file item 103, AB 2266 Bradford, at the request of the author. Without objection. And at request unanimous consent to allow Mr. Blumenfield to take up file item 95, AC 144, out of order. Without objection. Okay, members, without objection, we will now move file item 95, AC 144 by Mr. Blumenfield. Clerk will read.
Assembly concur in Resolution 144 by Assemblymember Blumenfield and others relative to Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month.
Mr. Blumenfield, you may open on the measure.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members, and distinguished guests that we have here today. Before we take up the special presentation today, I'm presenting a bill about Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month, something that I think is appropriately related to the topic of the day, and something I'm urging all of you to support. ACR 144, and last week we recognized the Armenian genocide. Today we're talking about the Holocaust. ACR 144 is a way to bring awareness about all of the different genocides that have occurred throughout history. This is a way that can help Californians raise awareness about the tragedies that have happened. Just yesterday, I was participating in a Jewish World Watch did a genocide awareness walk, and I helped kick off this event, and I was very inspired. There were over 2,000 people there to talk, to lend their ears, their feet to promoting the awareness about genocide, and it was quite moving. Something that one of the rabbis that was there, Rabbi Chulois from Valley Beth Shalom, said really stuck with me, and I want to share it with you. He quoted Psalms 115, and he talked about how bad things happen sometimes when people who have eyes do not see, people who have ears do not listen, people who have mouths do not speak. Today, when we take up this resolution, what we are saying is we will speak. We'll speak with our voices, we'll speak with our votes, and we'll say that we're going to be aware about the genocide, the terrible things that have happened. And as we know, there have been many genocides. Of course, 1915, the Armenian genocide that led to the deaths of more than 1 million people, Armenians. The issuing of the final solution in April of 1933, also in April, ultimately took the lives and souls of 6 million Jews and many, many millions of others. The Cambodian killing fields in 1975, in April again, led to the deaths of over 2 million people. The siege of Sarajevo in 1992 resulted in the deaths of more than 2,000 Bosnians. Mass killings in Rwanda started April of 2004. Approximately 800,000 people lost their lives. And in April 2003, the displacement of the Darfurians began in the Sudan with hundreds of thousands of deaths and displacements. I wish that this kind of genocide was confined to the annals of history, but it's going on today. It's going on in Darfur. It's something that we need to do everything we can to remember and do everything we can to promote awareness so that it doesn't continue to happen and it never again happens in the future. And I think it's an important bill to take up prior to our remembrance celebration, and I ask for your aye vote on this resolution. Thank you.
Mr. DeVore?
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I rise in support of Assembly Concurrent Resolution 144 by Blumenfield. Ladies and gentlemen, this solemn remembrance today, I think it's very important that as we look upon the amazingly evil crimes that were committed what now seems like so many years ago in Europe, it's important that we not lose sight of the fact that here among us are not only people who were victims of the Holocaust, but also people who served with the uniform of the Armed Forces of the United States of America, people who would ultimately become liberators and the enders of the Holocaust. Unfortunately, all too often it is said today that war is not the answer. Well, ladies and gentlemen, war is a terrible thing. But standing by and allowing evil to continue forward without being stopped is worse. War is a terrible thing, but slavery is worse. War is a terrible thing, but allowing evil to go unchecked, I think, is a greater evil. And so, ladies and gentlemen, let us be mindful of the fact that the people here among us, both survivors and those who wore the uniform of the United States of America, are individuals who have dignity because they are all created in God's image. And let us not forget that the members of the U.S. Armed Forces all swear an oath to support and defend the United States Constitution. And that Constitution is really part of the greater mission statement of the United States, the mission statement being to ensure our unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so to put things into proper context, yes, today we have victims among us and we have liberators among us, and let their travails, let the horrific things that they have seen and gone through and weathered, let those be our inspiration to move forward and to not only say never again, but to act on that principle, never again. Vote for ACR 144.
Mr. Blumenfield, would you like to close?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I'd like to first open the roll for co-authors of this important resolution to make April Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month.
Mr. Blumenfield is asking for the first roll to be open for co-authors. The clerk will open the roll. This is for co-authors, members. All those desiring to vote, please vote. All those who want to be co-authors, please vote. All those who would like to be co-authors, please vote. Clerk will close the roll. There are 56 co-authors. We can take a voice vote on this item. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The measure is adopted. Members, we will now move to the special ceremony in remembrance of the Holocaust. Without objection, we will now move to the resolution relative to the Holocaust remembrance. The clerk will read file items 67, ACR 31, Ruskin.
Assembly Concurrent Resolution 31 by Assemblymember Ruskin relative to California Holocaust Memorial Week.
Without objection, Mr. Block will take this item up on behalf of Mr. Ruskin. Mr. Block, you may open on the measure.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, ACR 31 proclaims April 12th through April 18th of 2010 as California Holocaust Memorial Week, which designates these days of remembrance for survivors and victims of the Holocaust in an appropriate manner. When I came to these chambers earlier this morning and met individual survivors, guests who were with us, survivors and liberators, I was struck at how we are still witnessing living history here. If you look, members, to your left and right and see the people who have joined us, this is being part of history. And to be in these hallowed chambers now with folks who've gone through so much is humbling to me, and I'm sure humbling to many of you. And Resolution ACR 31 recognizes the past and really projects the future, as my colleague said, that this never happen again. I'm sitting here with Gussie Zaks, who is head of the New Life Club in San Diego. And Gussie has been through so much, but lives every day with such joy and brings joy to all in San Diego. Just in the last week, she headed up 2 survivor events in San Diego. And she is what all of us aspire to be, a person of joy, of hope, and a successful person in keeping the history of the Holocaust alive. For more than 60 years have passed now since the tragedy of the Holocaust, in which, as we know, 11 million people, including 6 million Jews, were murdered as part of a carefully orchestrated, state-sponsored program of annihilation. We must recognize the heroism of those who survived the concentration camps, those who provided assistance to the victims of the Nazi regime, and those who liberated the camps. And we must teach our children and future generations that acts of heroism during the Holocaust serve as a powerful example of how our nation and its citizens can and must respond to acts of hatred and inhumanity, acts that, as we know, continue today. We must not divert our eyes from the photographs of the atrocities of the Nazi regime, of the concentration camps and the ghettos. Some things are very hard to see, but we must allow ourselves the pain of visiting these horrible images so that we continue our efforts to document the lives and experiences of those who perished and those who survived. Today we're honoring these remarkable Californians who are survivors and liberators here in our chamber, and I ask for your aye vote on ACR 31 and would like to ask the first vote be taken for open for co-authors.
Thank you, Mr. Block. Mr. Furutani?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members. I wanted to rise not only in support of this very significant, important resolution, but to also thank the Jewish American members of the legislators and many in the Third House and those that sponsored the Seder that we went to last week. I was sitting at a table with other folks, most of which were Jewish American. I don't know why, but I ate all of my gefilte fish and nobody else did. So I don't know if it's a supposed taste for fish because of being Japanese American, but that was the case. I sit here and with a guest, and I thank Bonnie for helping us bring these folks together here from my end of town, but with Robert Gemender, and just briefly sharing his story. If you look at this gentleman, he's a very young-looking man, and that's because while in camp, yes, stand up, Robert. While in camp, actually, he didn't quite make it to camp. 100 yards from Auschwitz, he was lifted up in the car that he was in, the railroad car, and was able as a 9-year-old boy to open this trap door, which then he and his brother and his mother and a friend climbed through, climbed down, and ran across the tracks into a neighboring farmhouse where they hid. And when we look at these different events that we have on the floor, I always put them in the category of a teaching moment. And sometimes teaching is two-dimensional, books, pictures, and sometimes, candidly, members, when we sit at our desk and we look at our green light and our red light, and we look at the tote board when we vote, it sometimes is two-dimensional. But when we have living history sitting right next to us, and we can bring them to our floor, then suddenly it becomes three-dimensional. It has texture, it has form, it has emotion, and it has feeling. And when you look at history through those eyes, when you look at history being able to touch it and feel it, then you get a sense, just a sense, because nobody, no matter who in their experience, could fathom, could empathize, could sympathize with what those of you must have survived. But for me, there's another nexus. And as a Japanese American, it goes beyond eating fish or liking the gefilte fish. But it's with the 522nd Military Battalion that was one of the first groups that helped liberate the Dachau subcamps. And they were Japanese Americans. And I don't know how those of you that were survivors must have contemplated or synthesized the information as these Japanese Americans came up to you in helmet, carrying their gear and their weapons to be a part of the liberating force. But probably it doesn't matter. Color of skin, slant of eye, texture of hair. You are all Americans. You're all here today. You're all living history, and I thank you for it. And I stand in great honor to be a sponsor of this bill as well. Thank you.
Mr. Swanson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of ACR 31 by our friend, Mr. Ruskin. Let me say that the Assembly, the entire Assembly, stands honored today to host the survivors of the Holocaust and the brave men and women who rescued them, who liberated them in Europe. This event, the 8th Annual Holocaust Remembrance Memorial, is one of our finest events. Today we take time to honor those and to celebrate the lives of those. And I think we do this because it's important that each generation never forget, and that we remind each generation of the contributions that have been made, and the lives that have been affected by those that have gone through such a terrible and horrific experience. Sitting with me are the Fixlers, and it's funny how our lives have crossed. They spent years in Oakland, a business 50 years in Oakland, not far from the parks I used to play as a youngster, not knowing this history and the contribution that they were making to my community, hiring dropouts in his clothing store, raising a beautiful family who go on to make contributions, but remembering the cold and unhuman condition. And Mr. Fixler said it's the worst form of slavery. And so it's easy for us to think about this as history long past. But each generation has a responsibility to say never again and to remember this. And remember that their success in being here and the contribution that their families have made to our community make us a better state and a better nation. And so it's with great pride, Madam Speaker, and members of this body, that I stand to celebrate the survivors, the rescuers, and these true American patriots. Thank you very much, and I ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Furrow.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. This is always a complicated day as we collectively try to sort through some very profound feelings. It's complicated for me. I, as some of you know, used to represent survivors of the Holocaust as an attorney when they sought restitution from the German government for the suffering that they'd endured. Seeing the arm of someone who had a tattoo cruelly stenciled into it to identify them in a concentration camp, and listen how they described being ripped from the arms of their parents. It's a complicated day. A couple of years ago on this floor, when it was very fresh memory, I recounted going to Israel with a delegation that included some of you. And a particular day at Yad Vashem, which is the memorial in Jerusalem to the Holocaust, and going through that museum and coming across a replica of a manifest, a real list of people who were sent in a boxcar to a concentration camp to perish, and the incredible coincidence of reading that manifest, the only one in Yad Vashem, and seeing an individual who carries my family name, which is a very rare name, Feuereisen, carried that name to his death, a man who would have been actually my age today. And then later on that day, being asked to lead our delegation in Kaddish, which is the prayer traditionally recited when people die in Jewish tradition, and hardly being able to speak, and then going to the Children's Memorial at Yad Vashem, which is actually named for the deceased brother of a friend of mine, the brother perished in the Holocaust. Very complicated day. But we have some choices to make, as to how we reflect on this day, it seems to me. It must be a remembrance of loss. But it needs to be, I think, a lot more than that. Look around the chamber. This needs to be an affirmation of great courage, of resilience. I mean, you have to look around the room and ask, did Hitler have the last word? Or do the people who sit with us, members today, who survived the Holocaust, who have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, who is having the last word? Who's resilient? Why do we use the word survivor to depict the people who are here today? It's a complicated day for a couple other reasons. There is here a heroism here in many forms. As has been mentioned, there are people here who liberated camps. And I would dare say, having heard some of the liberators speak, that for them this is a complex moment. Because on the one hand, when they liberated the camps, I know that upon seeing the devastation and the horror for which they were completely unprepared by their superiors, they also asked, why did this have to happen? Did we as a nation do enough? And we know we did not. Because we did not. We affirmatively chose not to bomb the tracks that carried people to their deaths at concentration camps. We deliberately turned away people seeking refuge on our coast. It's a complicated day. But I have to say that on a day like this, and looking around the room, there is something that we all ought to bear in mind. On this floor, we sometimes engage in very partisan discussions and sometimes bitter discussions about differences ideologically among us. But the fact is that today, we, I think, can properly focus on much deeper values that will always unite everybody in this room. Values that go to how we treat the stranger, how we deal with people unlike ourselves. That's the lesson of today. And ultimately, that's the definition of who we are. So for me, sorting through these complicated emotions and feelings today, the most salient point is, it is how we commit to act, how we commit to treat those unlike ourselves that will assure that days like this serve a higher meaning. And I rise, of course, in support of the resolution.
Mr. Logue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise also in support of the resolution. I have the honor to have a Holocaust survivor at my table here with Assemblywoman Fuller and a liberator. And this is a great moment for me. It's an honor to be in this house at this time, because I'm going to tell my children and they're going to tell their grandchildren about this generation, the greatest generation. And so their stories will be told in history, but I say this, that the soldiers and the people who survived are an inspiration to generations 1,000 years from now. My father fought and landed at Normandy and fought with General Patton and marched across Europe and fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and the only thing that he remembered that he could talk about was liberating those camps. That was the hardest thing that he ever dealt with in his life, and he never got over it because he saw the inhumanity of it. And he said, Dan, don't ever forget. And that's what he shared with me as a soldier in World War II. And I also just want to say that these veterans that are here today, they're my heroes because they symbolize what freedom is all about. And when my wife and I went to Israel 4 years ago, we got off a bus and we got applause from people standing around the bus. And I went up to them and I said, why are you applauding us? And they said, because you're from America and you represent freedom. And we love freedom. And this gentleman that told me that was a Holocaust survivor. And he says, we appreciate the liberty of the world, and it comes from your country. So I'm honored to be here today. You have changed my life. Your surviving has changed my life. You've made me a better person. And I know that 1,000 years from now, ladies and gentlemen, the world will speak of this generation. And they will say that was the finest hour for mankind because we looked evil in the eye and we conquered it. And we have survivors here today that will testify that to do the right thing and to survive this was our finest hour. So I rise in support of ARC 31. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Arambida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too rise in support of the resolution. And what I'd like to say is we are one people. We may come from the four corners of the world. We may have been divided by birth with oceans. We have come a great distance to be here today. And in the Pledge of Allegiance, we uttered the words, "with liberty and justice for all." Let us remember, both liberator and liberated, we are one people. Regardless of the zip code we live in, regardless of the religion we practice, regardless of the language that we may speak, we are one people. And today, with this resolution, let us give meaning to the words, "with liberty and justice for all." Let us put in practice today and every day of the year what it means to be free and have respect for all people, because whatsoever affects any one of us affects all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arambida. Mrs. Saldana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm very happy to have two survivors here with me today. Rose Schindler, who was my honoree a few years ago and was not able to travel, and this year was able to join us, and also Horst Kahn from San Diego. And a few years ago, I was able to travel to Israel and go to Yad Vashem and really see the result of a process that began in Germany. And a few months later, I found myself in Berlin at their Natural History Museum, and I saw that process and how it began years before many of the people who are with us here today wound up in the camps that they have survived. And what always occurs to me when I look around this room is what an historic day this is, to bring people together that have gone through such a horrific shared history but overcame that and came to our country and have gone on to live sometimes unbelievable. I'm certain at one point in their lives they never imagined that they would be where they are today. And also to remember that this was a process that began many years before those camps were ever constructed, before people were ever put into those camps. And having traveled to Berlin to see the propaganda, to see the types of messages that were put out to dehumanize people well before they were rounded up, to take away over the course of several years their property, their liberty, their ability to earn a living, their ability to educate themselves and their children. It was a very methodical process that took many years, and people, I think, noticed the process but could not imagine or chose not to imagine that final result that ultimately occurred. And I think that is an important lesson for us today, that these things, these horrific events, do not occur in an instant. They occur over a timeline that today the survivors discuss and share, sometimes for the first time, with schools, attending classes, talking with children and students. And I think that is so important, not only to encourage others to share and learn from their experience, but for children to learn to recognize that this is not something that we've done away with, as the resolution earlier today that was introduced, as Mr. Blumenfield introduced, that genocides and attacks on groups of people that have been dehumanized by propaganda continue to this very day all around the world. So I want to thank all of the survivors for being with us today, for continuing with their lessons, for reminding us that humans are capable of the most amazing and uplifting things, but when we're not careful, we're also capable of the most horrible things. And we have to discuss both to fully understand how to both perpetuate the good and prevent the horrific. So thank you so much for joining us for this celebration and this memorial today.
Mr. Colcho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I also want to commend Ira Ruskin for every year organizing and putting together this recognition, this celebration, this reminding ourselves of the importance of the events that we're talking about here today. So we ought to give Ira a big round of applause. Ira, thank you very, very much. Let me just say, I am standing here before you as representing the members of the Latino Caucus, our Vice President, Mr. Mendoza, and our President, Mr. Cedillo, wanted me to make sure that our voice was heard on this very special day. I want to add our remembrance for those who suffered and those who lost their lives in the Holocaust. We honor the veterans and survivors who join us today. Their resilience is an inspiration to all of us. Today, we also reaffirm our commitment that the Holocaust experience not be forgotten and that the horror of those years keeps within us a flame of vigilance that such events can never be repeated. And I think the statement that's included in all of our packets, because I think it's important that we not just do this once a year, but that as our report indicates, that this resolution, permission to read, Mr. Chair, this resolution serves to remind us that we must remain vigilant against hatred, persecution, and tyranny, lest these atrocities be repeated. And it goes on to say, and it should remind us to rededicate ourselves to the principles of human rights, individual freedom, and equal protection under the laws of a just and a democratic society. There was a president of Mexico, very famous president of Mexico, by the name of Benito Juárez, who used to say que el derecho al respeto ajeno es la paz. The respect for the rights of others is peace. So it is an honor for me to stand here in support of this resolution.
Thank you. Mr. Block, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to thank my colleagues for their stirring and obviously heartfelt words in support of this resolution. It is such an important day to those of us in the chamber. For those who are our guests, we don't often applaud each other in the chamber here. Sometimes we feel like booing, but we don't do that either. But today is such a special day. Some of the common rules are gone, and I applaud all of you who are guests, all of you liberators, survivors, and the colleagues who've made such moving statements. And I ask that we open the roll for co-chairs.
Without objection, the roll be open for co-authors. Remember, this is for co-authors. Clerk will open the roll. Members, this is for co-authors. All those vote who desire to vote. 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 Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 66 co-authors are added. Then now we'll have a voice vote on the resolution. All those in favor signify by the normal sound of aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. The resolution is adopted. At this time, I'd like to call on Mr. Ruskin to come to the rostrum. Mr. Ruskin.
Good afternoon. On behalf of my co-host, Assemblymember Block, may I say, members of the Assembly, as representatives of the people of the state of California, as you know, we have invited survivors of the Holocaust to join us here today. As it is every year, this is a very moving event. to the survivors of the Holocaust with us today, may I say we have invited you in solidarity and in respect because you bear the truest witness to that terrifying and terrible time. Also because you bear witness for those who perished in the Holocaust and in other genocides as well, and who perish today in genocidal campaigns. You bear witness, in fact, for those around the globe today who suffer from such attacks against humanity. And I thank you for attending. In the final years of World War II, Allied troops advancing across Europe began to liberate the concentration camps and bore witness to the Holocaust. Today, we're joined by some of those very soldiers, brave men who were part of the armed forces who liberated the survivors of the camps. As you bore witness over 60 years ago, you, gentlemen, are here to bear witness today as well, and I thank you for attending. We hold today's ceremony to remember and to lay bare what happens when one group in society is allowed to marginalize and ostracize another. Such marginalization may use segregation or apartheid or the preclusion of religious practices or physical intimidation and isolated killings, and when all that fails, or because it succeeds, the one group may attempt to destroy the other, especially if it gains power. Much has been said about how this can be prevented. I've come to the conclusion that we have only our moral compass and our individual courage to save us. I believe history has proven that there is little else we can rely on. Recently, outbreaks of hatred have multiplied. It is often the case in difficult times. Outbreaks have multiplied, including on our college campuses. Ugly displays of racism at universities. Most recently, acts against African Americans and Jews. Such attacks against one must be regarded as attacks against all. Fortunately, strong statements of outrage came from a variety of quarters, and we can be grateful to those who responded. As I have said in previous years in this ceremony, but I think it bears repeating, I believe that we are prone to the mistaken and therefore dangerous notion that an educated, even cultured society will do no such harm. But the designers of the final solution were highly educated and cultured, and many defenders of American slavery and subsequently of segregation had the finest educations available, and yet they vigorously argued the merits of both slavery and segregation. All policies of evil have a beginning, so each of us must do what is right when we encounter the smallest inkling of racism or bigotry. Whether it's a university student brandishing a noose or carving a swastika, or a vulgar opportunist in the media, or a demagogic politician, if we fail to speak out when evil masquerades as a small slander or at the beginning of a hateful political trend, we risk giving hatred legitimacy, and that legitimacy enables it to grow until even the brave among us are afraid to protest, as happened in Nazi Germany. In the presence of our visitors today, members, let us pledge to listen for the pained cries of those who suffer the brutality of marginalization and genocide, and to remember that we're really one human tribe. In that way, we can honor and harvest the promise of our humanity. In that spirit, I would now like to honor those who are visiting us on the floor today. I will read the names of the survivors and of the veteran liberators who are present with us. I would ask that as I read each name, that person stand if you wish. Let us begin. Ida Lou Balsam. Asa Bass. Dr. Gunter Bauer. Stella Beck. Lydia Budgor. Horst Kahn. Martha Cohn. Mary Dinitz. Gregory Feller. Leopold Fixler. Ella Fixler. Anshel Fried. Robert Jaminder. Gita Ginsburg. Saul Golan. John Gordon. Susan Greenwald. Jacob Harari. Liz Egra. Jack Illis. Jeff Emus. Bert Jacobs. Mella Katznelson. Bill Kay. Judith Kennedy. Cecilia Kornbluth. Siggy Kornbluth. Stephen Kovari. Henry Libicki. Dave Lux. Bernard Marks. Benjamin Midler. Dorit Nadus. Jack Parisser. Morris Piotrkowski. Ghetto Piotrkowski. Suzanne Prager. Inga Rosenthal. Frank Rothman. Bernard Sion. Rose Schindler. Ruth Spencer. Paula Torley. Manfred Trauring. Ellen Van Creveld. Jack Van Creveld. Herta Weinstein. Taube Weiss, excuse me. Gussie Zaks. Michael Zellen. And now I'll read the names of our honored veteran liberators who are here with us today. Please stand as I read your name. Ambrose Brodus, Jr. Jose Castro. Harry Hudson, Oscar Leonard, Joe Medico, Joe Rivas. Thank you for all of us for gracing our assembly floor. Thank you very much. Thank you. I would now like to introduce our keynote speaker, who also kindly served as our guest chaplain earlier, Rabbi Denise Egger. Rabbi Egger is spiritual leader at Congregation Kol Ami in West Hollywood. She received her master's degree from Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. She currently serves as vice president of the Southern California Board of Rabbis and is the founding president of the Lesbian, Gay, and Bisexual Interfaith Clergy Association. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to present Rabbi Egger.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished assembly members and staff and honored guests, I thank you for the invitation to speak this morning. On this day, we've gathered to honor Holocaust Memorial Day and Remembrance Week. The Jewish calendar calls it Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura, Holocaust Memorial and Heroes Day. Today, here in this chamber, is a legacy of memory for all of us. And we've heard about so many lessons that must guide our lives. As was said, it's not only a time to memorialize the dead, but to pay tribute to those of you who have survived. And we honor all of you who have fought so valiantly against the evils of the Nazis and Axis regimes. We honor you who have served in the military and those in the ghettos and camps who rose up and fought back. Why this day? Why April 19th? April 19th, 1943 was the beginning day of the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto. The Nazis had marched into the ghetto that they had made. It was a desolate and dark place where they had forced the Jews of Warsaw to live. It was a place of disease and destruction, starvation, and danger at every corner. The Nazis, as part of the final solution, proceeded with plans to liquidate the remaining 50,000 Jews there, down from more than 550,000 at its height, through death and transfer to concentration camps. But on that April 19th, 1943, 67 years ago today, the Nazis entered the ghetto only to find it empty. No one was there. The residents, over the course of several months, had built many underground tunnels and bunkers, and they hid. And they hid and fought back against the Nazi terrorists and murderers. For 3 weeks, they engaged in battle with the Nazis in a fierce guerrilla battle, street to street, house to house, building to building. They stymied the Nazis for the first couple of days, the young Jewish fighters of the Jewish Combat Organization, until the leadership was killed on May 8th at their headquarters on Mila Street, number 18. And so this afternoon in our capital, in this session, we come together to remember all the victims of Nazi terror and to honor the lives of the dead, to honor the lives of you who have survived and those who fought to restore dignity, human civility, and life. We honor the memory of the 6 million Jews who were targeted by the Nazis. And we also remember that the Nazis targeted so many groups that did not fit their image of perfection. In addition to the Jews of Europe, the Nazis specifically targeted the physically and mentally handicapped, Jehovah's Witnesses, labor organizers, gay men and lesbians, the Roma people known as gypsies, political prisoners, communists, and more than 2 million Polish Gentiles and Slavs were the victims of Nazi terror. 15 million people were murdered by the Nazis and their killing machines. In California terms, that's like murdering everyone in the Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Santa Ana metropolitan corridors. Think about it. It's hard to imagine that many people. It's hard to imagine the children and grandchildren that will never be. Today, our commemoration reminds us that this kind of human evil, the mass murder and destruction of our fellow human beings, must always be stopped. We cannot sit idly by the blood of our neighbors. Today in our world, there are genocides happening as we stand here this day. In Uganda, there is a bill proposed to target gay men and lesbians. It would prescribe the death penalty for even saying that you are gay. In other parts of Africa, in Darfur and the Congo, entire groups are being targeted, murdered, raped, and disfigured as government militias roam the countryside, routing out and killing all who are of a different faith or a different tribe. On this day, we must pause to remember and reflect, to be advocates for others. For this, the Holocaust Memorial Week and Remembrance Day is a legacy that calls us to action. But today we honor also those of you who survived. You are strong and courageous people, living testimony to those who would falsely claim that the Holocaust never happened. And oh, there are many of them. And so we honor your tenacity, your fortitude, your endurance. And we honor you who served in the Allied forces to liberate Europe and the Pacific from the hands of Axis troops, those who marched into the concentration camps and torture centers and liberated, working through grueling and often inhumane conditions to restore humanity to our world. We thank you for our service to our country and to the world as a force for good. Your actions and heroism are a legacy for us. The Talmud teaches, if you save one life, you've saved the world, and you, veterans, honored soldiers, saved more than one world, many worlds, by your service. And so I close this afternoon, with a powerful story of memory and how it can keep us moving forward in life to action. For that is the essence of this commemoration, moving forward to a full life, conscious of our duties to our fellow human beings, conscious and fully aware that genocide, ethnic cleansing, and injustices must be addressed not only by individuals, but yes, by governments. And this story is based on an interview with Anna in May of 1976. Anna was among the tens of thousands who succumbed to the typhus epidemic in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Her friends had given her up for dead and told her that her struggle with death was useless. But Anna was determined to live. She knew that if she lay down, the end would come soon, and she would die like so many around her. So in a delirious state, she wandered around the camp, stumbling over the dead and the dying. Her strength was giving away. She felt that her feet were refusing to carry her any farther. As she was struggling to get up from the cold, wet ground, she noticed a distant hill shrouded in gray mist, and Anna felt a strong sensation. Instantly, the hill in the distance symbolized life to her. She knew that if she reached the hill somehow, she would survive, but if she failed, she would succumb to the typhus. Anna attempted to walk toward the hill, which continually assumed the shape of a mound, a huge grave. And yet, that mound remained a symbol of Anna's life. She was determined to reach it. On hands and knees, she crawled towards it. And as hours passed, Anna reached her destination. With feverish hands, she touched the cold mound of earth. And with her last drop of strength, she crawled atop of it and collapsed. And oh, then the tears flowed. The first time tears had flowed since her incarceration. She began to call to her father, "Papa, please help me. Give me the strength. I cannot go on any longer." Suddenly, she felt a warm hand on the top of her head. It was as if her father was stroking her head as she was a small child. The warm, strong hands of her father that he used to place upon her head every Sabbath eve, every Friday night, to give her his special blessing. Anna recognized those comforting hands, and she began to sob more, and she began to pour out her heart that she had no more strength to go on. Her father listened and caressed her, but this time he did not recite the customary blessings. Instead, said to her, "Don't worry, my child, you will survive, for in a few days, liberation is very close." This occurred on Wednesday night, April 11th, 1945. And on Sunday, April 15th, the first British tanks entered Bergen-Belsen. When Anna was well enough to leave the hospital in the British zone where she was recovering from typhus, she returned to Bergen-Belsen. Only then did she learn that that huge mound of earth that called out to her, that she spent that faithful night on April 11th, was indeed a huge mass grave. And among the thousands of victims buried there in that mound of earth was indeed her father, who had perished months earlier in Bergen-Belsen. On that night, she won her battle with death as she wept on her father's grave. The memory of Anna's father helped summon the strength, even though she had a fever. That is a legacy of memory. And so, too, on this day of commemoration, the legacy of memory helps us summon the strength to face the future. May the memory of the millions of people murdered by the Nazis inspire us to action around the world and in our homes. May hatred be erased from our existence, and instead the milk of human kindness influence our days. May the memory of those who died in the camps and the ghettos and the murder fields of Europe, and all those who have been the victims of genocides around our globe, inspire us in right action and mindfulness of each person's dignity and humanity. May their memories live for a blessing in our lives, Zichronam Livracha, and may each of you, the survivors and the liberators, go on from this day in peace and health, from strength to strength. Ken Yehi Ratzon, so may it be God's will.
Thank you, Rabbi. My co-host, Assemblymember Block, and I would like to recognize the students who interview survivors and veterans and wrote essays based on those survivors and veterans' experiences. As we do every year, these essays are compiled in a book that will add to the permanent archives produced by this ceremony. These students are sitting in the gallery. If those students would please stand up and be recognized. I want to thank you all personally for all the effort you put into this. You have added immeasurably to the event, to its posterity, and also, I believe, significantly to passing these understandings as well as these stories from generation to generation. So thank you. I'd also like to thank the family, friends, and guests sitting in the gallery who came today to support their loved ones involved in the Holocaust Memorial Ceremony. Thank you to you all. We'd like to thank our keynote speaker and guest chaplain, Rabbi Denise Eger. Thank you, Rabbi. The Jewish Family and Children's Services of San Francisco, the Peninsula, Marin, and Sonoma. The Jewish Family and Children's Services of the East Bay. The Jewish Federation of Silicon Valley. Michael Bart, co-chair of the New Life Committee of San Diego. Assemblymember Dan Logue, my colleague, thank you, and your staff for your work with the World War II veteran liberators who are here present today, and thank you for introducing this poignant and significant element into these ceremonies last year. I want to thank the Speaker's Office for your assistance, especially Myra Turner, Ron Payne and the Sergeants for your help. My colleagues in the State Assembly, thank you for your generous support. And the members of Assemblymember Block's staff, especially Chris Ward and Lisa Silverman, and my staff, especially Nicole Fernandez, who are the real organizers of this important event. Assemblymember Block and I would like finally to invite all survivors, students, and guests to the reception that will now take place on the East Lawn facing L Street. This is the time for all guests to retire from the chambers and to go to the reception. I believe that members have some business left to do here, and with that, I return the gavel to Speaker Ma. Thank you very much.
And then we go second. Members, we still have a little more business to conduct in this House. Mr. Fuhrer, for what purpose do you rise?
Madam Speaker, I just rise to make a brief announcement regarding tomorrow's judiciary hearing. Is this an appropriate time?
Yes, it is.
Very good. So I just want to note that tomorrow's Judiciary Committee hearing will commence at 8:30, an earlier time because we have a lot of work to do. 8:30. Thank you.
Clerk will note. Ms. Caballero, for what purpose do you rise?
Madam Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to recognize Police Officer Gonzalez and the Salinas PAL students who are here today. I also had another group of students from North Salinas, North Monterey County High School. I'm not sure if they're here as well, a migrant ed program known as Águilas Guerras. If they could stand up and say hello, welcome. Pleased to have you here today.
Okay, members, we are going to business on the daily file. Second reading, the clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 2068, 1675, 1800, 2011, 2493, 1784, 2618, 1919, 2166, 2317, 1989 with amendments, 2323 with amendments, Assembly Joint Resolution 29 with amendments, Assembly Bill 2087 with amendments, 2143 with amendments, 2651 with amendments, 1869 with amendments, 2134 with amendments, 1808 with amendments, 2698 with amendments, 1818 with amendments, 2049 with amendments, 2223 with amendments, 2336 with amendments, 1760 with amendments, 2328 with amendments, 2147 with amendments, 2311 with amendments, 1610 with amendments, 1611 with amendments, 1612 with amendments, 1613 with amendments, 1614 with amendments, 1615 with amendments, 1616 with amendments, 1617 with amendments, 1618 with amendments, 1619 with amendments, 1620 with amendments, 1621 with amendments, 1622 with amendments, 1623 with amendments, 1624 with amendments, 1625 with amendments, 1626 with amendments, 1627 with amendments, 1628 with amendments, 1629 with amendments, 1630 with amendments, 1631 with amendments, 1632 with amendments, 1633 with amendments, 1634 with amendments, 1635 with amendments, 1636 with amendments, 1637 with amendments, and Assembly Bill 2724 with amendments.
All bills will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Members, we're going to take up the consent calendar. We are at the second day consent calendar. Does any member wish to remove an item from the second day consent calendar? Seeing and hearing none, the clerk will read.
Assembly concurs Resolution 102 by Assemblymember Cotto relative to John Cola interchange.
Clerk will open the roll on the consent calendar. All members who desire to vote, vote. All members who desire to vote, vote. This is on the consent calendar, members. The clerk will close the roll and tally the vote. Ayes 67, no 0. The consent calendar is adopted.
Assembly concurrent Resolution 106.
Ayes 67, no 0.
Assembly concurrent Resolution 109.
Ayes 67, no 0.
Assembly concurrent Resolution 113.
Ayes 67, no 0.
Assembly concurrent Resolution 122.
Ayes 67, no 0.
Assembly concurrent Resolution 124.
Ayes 67, no 0.
Assembly concurrent Resolution 127.
Ayes 67, no 0.
Assembly concurrent Resolution 130.
Ayes 67, no 0.
Assembly concurrent Resolution 131.
Ayes 67, no 0.
And Assembly concurrent Resolution 136.
Ayes 67, no 0. This concludes the business on the daily file in the regular session. All other items remaining will be passed and retained. All motions shall be continued. Mr. Gilmore, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Point of inquiry, would this be a good time to recognize some students from my district that are in the gallery?
Without objection.
Thank you. Members, if you would welcome some students from Vineland and from Arvin High School up in our chamber here, if you'd welcome them today, I would really appreciate it, from Kern County. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Okay, members, the session schedule is as follows. Tuesday, April 20th, check-in session. Wednesday, April 21st, check-in session. Thursday, April 22nd, floor session will be at 9 a.m., members. Thursday, April 22nd, floor session will be at 9 a.m. I am ready to entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Block moves, Mr. Hagman seconds, that this House stands adjourned until Thursday, April 22nd at 9 a.m. Quorum call is lifted.